I had a hobby too. Mine happened to be guns and ballistics, and I studied guns and ballistics as much as I could, and I wrote an article about high velocity.
So out of all my years working at Weatherby, the last 5 have been some of the most exciting. Working with Adam, with him running the company.
And to think that I get the opportunity of carrying on my grandfather's legacy 75 years later here in Sheridan, Wyoming, I mean, it really is a dream come true.
Oh, I'm home. Thank God I'm home.
On Our Mark, the Weatherby Podcast.
Welcome back to the Weatherby Podcast. On Our Mark, the Weatherby Podcast. We've got 2 guests, one super special guest today, Tyler Grethen.
I'm not sure that's how you say my last name.
It's not. It's great, him. And I know that, but I messed it up the first time on accident. Now I do it on purpose every time.
That's wrong.
But it's going to make people remember that it's not Grethen, even though I
No.
even tell people that it's Grethen.
Random-
If they're trying to spell it, I have to say it's Grethen because it's like, you're not going to get it right.
Random people are going to be like, hey, Tyler Grethen.
Great hen.
It's going to be good.
Yeah. So.
And our super special guest is Brian, who is a weed scientist for the University of Wyoming.
That's right.
And it's exactly what you think it is.
It's not what you think it is. It is not.
Brian, because you do a lot, and I'll butcher if I try to say exactly what you do. Give us your who is Brian Mealor?
Okay, sure. So I'm faculty in the Department of Plant Sciences at University of Wyoming. Mostly the work that I do focuses on restoring rangeland habitats that have been impacted by a number of different things, but largely by invasive plant species. And when I say rangeland habitats, thinking primarily western U.S., not defined by land use, so not defined by the fact that there's livestock grazing on there, but lands that are dominated by grasses, forbs, shrubs, like sagebrush habitats, grasslands, and things
Right on.
like that.
And you guys work on both private and public land stuff? There's not like a designation there?
Yeah, we work across the board. So primarily our focus is research and education, but we do a lot of partnership work too. And the issues that we work on are not sort of delineated by land ownership.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah.
So we've got a mutual friend and employee here at Weatherby that kind of introduced us. We already knew each other. I don't think we really knew what the other one of us did, which was funny.
Right.
Our kids are friends, our wives are friends, and then I'm guilty often in our little community here in Sheridan of like, I don't often like to talk about what I do because it's more for my wife. Because then people will the conversation's like, oh man, let's talk about why the 257 Weatherby is the best cartridge in the history of the world.
Right.
And then she's gone. I see her eyes roll back, and I'm like, I'm sorry. So I also don't ask people what they do for a living anymore. Because I just I want to know about you as a person. And,
noble.
You do some work, but, anyway. I just thought that was funny. So JD makes this connection, and you guys came in with a little bit of a task force that you had put together a few weeks ago. We started talking about some things that you guys are working on. I'm on the board of directors for Mule Deer Foundation. What you guys are doing directly affects mule deer habitat and mule deer herds. And I'm ashamed to say that I was familiar with the words you were saying, but I often also didn't know exactly what you were talking about because I'm an avid hunter. I've been a lifelong outdoor person, but I know what Bermuda and fescue and St. Augustine and rye are, but I don't know all these native grasses and what's native, what's invasive annual grass, and what that really means negatively to what our deer herds and antelope herds are doing. So you guys were working on that, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we got to tell the story a little more. So tell the story, Brian.
Yeah. So if you look, there's kind of a group of invasive annual grasses. We'll break that down. Annual basically means they live for one growing season, they produce seed, and that individual plant dies.
Versus a perennial.
Right. Exactly.
I know that.
Right.
Much.
So they're completely dependent on seed production. Invasive usually means that they came from somewhere else, usually a different continent in this case. Mm-hmm. And that they can move unaided into natural ecosystems, right? So you don't have to till up the soil or something to make it susceptible to their invasion. So the kind of the big three, cheatgrass, medusa head, and ventinata, are the ones that we largely talk about. Different histories, different invasion sort of patterns, but the realized impacts are big and growing from these species in the western U.S. What those impacts look like are direct sort of impacts to forage production and quality, which is livestock, wildlife, and everything. There's actually really strong documentation that they reduce the diversity of species on sites when they become abundant. We can talk about why that matters. It sounds like a really sort of nerdy detail.
No, we're here to get nerdy.
I mean, why it matters. So if you think about the ability of a plant community to respond to stressors, drought, prolonged winters, whatever we want to talk about, having diversity there gives some raw material for that plant community to kind of change and respond. And so if we reduce the diversity on those sites, which is what annual grasses often do, then the ability to respond to stressors in the future also diminishes.
So boiling it down, like what are they doing? Is it just taking up the soil space or the surface space of another better plant?
Partly.
It's not a good food source for animals, or what's like?
Yep.
Why is it a problem?
So partly
I get
it's resource,
taking up the diversity.
Partly it's resource competition. So,
Okay.
And largely in the western U.S., it's driven by moisture patterns.
Okay.
So those three that I mentioned germinate in the fall. So we get a little bit of moisture. In most of the western U.S., they'll germinate in the fall. So we get some fall moisture, September. They all germinate and get started. And then
they get covered in snow.
And they get covered in snow. And if our snow ever melts in Sheridan this
man.
spring, they will be the first thing to start growing really actively. And they'll use up that shallow soil moisture and they basically take it from our desirable perennial grasses. So they kind of induce a drought situation all the time when they're there, whether it's a drought year
Okay.
or not.
And those taking all those resources are literally killing the native grass then, or like making it recede, or it's just like chipping away little by little, or how does it actually take away that?
So I'd say it suppresses the growth. Okay. So usually you'd have all this great productive grasslands, and then when you have a whole bunch of cheatgrass there, you get something that it lives fast and dies. Right.
Well, we've got a pretty short growing season here.
We do, absolutely. And so any bit of moisture that you have, and you start moving over into Nevada and parts of Utah, and it's even shorter.
Right.
And so we have drought anyway, and these exacerbate the drought.
Gotcha.
And the other really sort of odd thing that they do is as they increase in abundance and they do this, they sort of change the way that entire ecosystem works. So things like nitrogen balance in the soil shifts to favor the invasive annual grasses. In extreme cases, because they dry out so early in the year, they alter the wildfire frequency. So you get like along the Snake River Plain in southern Idaho, in places where kind of all you see is cheatgrass. It used to be great sagebrush grasslands back in the day. But what has happened is because it creates a bunch of fine fuels.
Right.
And then we get one lightning strike or a tourist pulls off and it starts a fire. And then some of those places used to only burn like every 100 years, and now they burn every 3 to 5 years just because of these annual grasses.
And I'm sure there's soil erosion too, because with those faster growing, the root base isn't there. So then then the soil doesn't have structure to hold on to the root bases and stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You got just little wimpy, shallow roots. Mm-hmm. And so it can literally change the entire system. The big issue, especially if you're thinking about mule deer behind us, is the sagebrush sort of impacts. So sagebrush grasslands in the western U.S. are really important for a lot of reasons. Our big sagebrush subspecies do not do well with fire. So the annual grasses can just recover every year because they set their seeds and it burns and it comes back. But big sagebrush sucks as a competitor, and it doesn't resprout after fire. And so you get this puny little seedling that gets started and the fire comes back and it kills it again. So it changes it from a sagebrush grassland ecosystem basically to an annual grass ecosystem. So you lost all of those, that winter browse, you lost all of those things that you would have had historically, just because this silly little plant has come in and taken over.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah.
And the sage, like a sage, like that life cycle is like longer to develop too, right? For it to become maturity, all that stuff as well, right? Is that
Absolutely.
What I'm
Yeah,
getting?
they're
Okay.
really slow growing too. And so not only does, it just takes longer for them to get bigger, but they don't withstand that.
So
kind
like,
of
yeah, when you
disturbance.
see a giant sagebush plant like that, took
Oh, yeah,
a
it's
long
been there
time
for a
for
long
it to be
time.
like come to maturity and have that much yield, I guess,
Yeah.
for browse in the winter.
Yeah, it might only be up to your knee, but it might be 50 years old.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of wild to think
And
about.
it just can't, when you get that kind of frequent fire cycle, it just can't keep up.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what do you do about it?
So, I mean, the crazy thing is this has been a recognized issue since like the 40s, believe it or not.
Oh, so it's super fresh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it was Aldo Leopold in one of his books basically said that in parts of the southwestern U.S., he sort of tried to find an attitude of somebody that, what can we do about this and make a difference, instead of just accepting the fact.
Right.
And it was already hopeless then. Like, people were throwing their hands up in the air. I would say in the past 10 to 15 years, we have had advances in tools and technology, and I think our knowledge of natural systems, to where I'm not going to sit here and say we know how to fix the problem, but I think we're way closer now than we were before.
Okay.
I think we also understand the scope of the problem.
That's my next question.
Way
What
more
happens
than
if
we
we
do
don't
before.
fix the problem?
So the group that we were with, that we brought in a couple weeks ago now, we are building on some recent research that kind of capitalizes on new advancements in satellite imagery, remote sensing stuff. And over a 20-year period, the sort of take-home message at looking at sagebrush habitats in the West is that we have been losing roughly 1.3 million acres of high-quality sagebrush habitat every year. And
1.3 million a year?
Yeah,
That's a
1.3
lot.
million acres per year, and 75% of that loss is directly attributed to impacts from invasive annual grasses. Right. The other major components are, I think that we're calling it human modification, which is like you're building a house,
Sure.
or
Just
roads.
industrial development.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And conifer encroachment, which is kind of a weird thing, but like eastern red cedar, juniper expansion, and things like that.
Yeah.
But-
Cedars are pretty prolific, right?
Yeah, yeah, especially when you get over into the Great Plains. I mean, they're really expanding pretty rapidly. So if you just wrap your mind around stopping the bleeding on 1.3 million acres of loss every year, it's a pretty big deal. I mean, one of the reasons why I think we're as involved in Wyoming as we are, and not to be like a homer for Wyoming, but the bulk of the highest quality intact sagebrush grasslands in the West are in Wyoming. Like 40% of what's
That's
left
why we
is
have
still
great
here.
antelope herds.
That's why we have so many different things.
Right.
Right. We've got most of the sage grouse that still persist in the country, or in the state of Wyoming too. And so the scale and the urgency, I think, are growing, and a lot of attention at the national level around this issue is really starting to kind of bubble up to the forefront too.
So with kind of the organizations you guys are involved with, is it more of like stopping and preserving what we have now, or what is like the steps, I guess? And I don't want to, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself
that's a
here,
great
but
question. Were you at our meeting 2 weeks ago?
I was not. I was not there actually.
So and I think that's part of this sea change that's been happening in the last few years. I mean, we're problem solvers by nature, and so if we're, you ask what do we do about it, I think our tendency is, let's go find the worst place we can find and fix it and make it better because it's so messed up.
Sure.
Right, but our new sort of spatial game plan, and we're now applying this at a broader scale. The concept is not new. We think about it in terms of, we say like defend the core and grow the core. Okay. So find the really good places that are still left, and that are susceptible to being degraded, and work out from there. So like, don't go to the worst place, but go and protect and expand and work your way back. It's like a wildfire model. Like, have you ever been involved with firefighting?
I have not, but I'm picturing like a map of like where there is the quality, and like you don't want that to continue to shrink. So instead of putting resources in all this, spot where, not that there's not hope there, but like making sure that like, hey, let's really put all that same amount of resources into protecting what we have instead of kind of the
fixing what's already broke.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
exactly. And while you're over here trying to fix what's already broke, the good stuff behind you that you're not paying attention to is breaking.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I want to clarify, you said the word protect. I might have said the word protect. We're not talking about like put a fence around it and don't do anything. It's in some of our discussions, some of the reasons that it probably is still good habitat is because of the way it's been managed for all this time. I mean, the ranchers are doing something right. The agency people are doing something right. And so it's not this protectionist approach. It's what are we doing right, and how can we do that elsewhere? And how can we just shift the focus of where we're doing our efforts to not lose the stuff that's still really good? So that's one of the big changes. Spatial game plan at scale, facilitated by satellite imagery, and then we start drilling down to figure out what are we actually going to do on the landscape.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What can average Joe Hunter do? Like, let's just say we got a guy coming out here from Alabama. I just picked a random state. We've got a guy coming up here in Alabama, his first time here hunting antelope. What should he pay attention to? What should he do? Does he need to carry a little bottle of Roundup and spray bad grass?
Man, dude, that's a great idea.
Before you answer that though, maybe also paint the landscape for Joe Hunter. If he doesn't do something, what can they expect? And then this is why it's important to do it. So if we did nothing, and
if we
just
keep
continued,
losing 1.3 million acres a year,
what does that look like for hunting? So then you can tell what Joe Hunter can do, because if he doesn't understand how is this going to affect me? So not a lot of people buy in. I mean, that's kind of human nature in a sense, but maybe give a brief of what if we don't do anything could happen, and then then we can step into things that Joe Hunter could do.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think Mule Deer Foundation has been involved in some of these efforts that I'm thinking about right now. The place that comes to mind immediately that would directly sort of illustrate that for somebody who wants to come west and hunt is some of the country in Nevada that has been severely impacted by these grasses. I think in some of those locations, their mule deer numbers have dropped by half.
Yeah, that's painful.
That's bad. Mm-hmm. And so,
which means less tags,
which means
less opportunity.
Less opportunity. It means all those things that we care about. And it also means, just the fact that it means less deer. And so if that trend continues, there are other stressors that could impact those deer herds, and it starts to pile on. And so you end up with this, I'm not going to say a collapse, but a pretty darn downward spiral.
Right. Which is why Weatherby is interested in this, because if you just keep going down that downward spiral, you got less deer, less tags, less opportunity, more competition for limited opportunity, and then you get people frustrated, and then you get people that start to drop out of hunting.
Right.
Which we do not want to have happen.
No. Yeah, so Tyler, if you think, beyond that, beyond the deer numbers and the effect on that, what, I don't, maybe you don't notice. I am.
You're probably acutely aware.
I'm tainted for life, right? I drive through places, and I just get sick sometimes. But
that's what I'm hopeful that there's an outcome of this podcast, is that if a handful of people start to realize, oh, that's that stuff Brian was talking about.
Right. Yeah.
Because once you see something, you can't, or you know something, you can't unknow it.
You can't. I know.
It's like you drive past something and a certain thing happened there, and every time you drive past that spot, you're like, I remember that. There's a good memory, bad memory, whatever it is, but the knowledge has to be there.
It does.
Right.
So, getting some general awareness is part of it, but I guess to finish up your question is, I like driving through country that's got different vegetation to look at. Mm-hmm. I mean, you think about it, it dictates where you go if you're planning to hunt too. In some
For sure.
cases. I mean, probably not as much as like where you draw a tag, but once you draw the tag,
Where you apply for a tag.
yeah, true. If you get to the point, like I can think of places where I can drive in the western U.S. for multiple hours, and this is not an attack on like cornfield country, but so you can drive through parts of the Midwest for hours, and all you see is corn. It's feeding the country.
Sure.
It's feeding the country.
Yeah.
It's doing great
Iowa.
things. But I can drive through other parts of the country for hours, and all I see is cheatgrass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That balance is way different, right? It's potentially a boring drive either way, but the impacts of one is way, way worse than it is elsewhere. And so having that sort of diversity of habitat types instead of converting it all to one thing, that you said paint the picture, that's part of the picture.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It sounds really like doom and gloom and sensational and bad, but I could take you there right now.
But like species like mule deer, and I'm sure some of our upland species are probably more affected by this. So you'll see those particular species start to dwindle.
Absolutely.
Even more. But so we're talking mule deer here, but it's also mule deer. It's other upland birds. It's
sage grouse is hugely affected by this. Yeah. Okay. I mean, think about it. If you depend on plants for your groceries, and your groceries are only edible for about 2.5 weeks out of the year.
Yeah, so it's not that the wildlife don't eat the cheatgrass. It's that it just doesn't. It's taking up a spot in the ground, and then it's unedible 98% of the time.
Or if they eat it, it really doesn't give them any nutrition.
Gotcha.
And then you take the other two, Ventinata and Medusa head, and they are almost completely impalatable any time of the year.
They won't even touch it.
Yeah. So like our good perennial, I mean, for a comparison, like our good perennial grasses, they might be green and nutritious, I mean, for months.
Right. Starting hopefully any day now.
Oh, any day now. Hopefully they'll start to green up. And here in this corner of the state, we might still have green, highly nutritious forage in our native ecosystems until August, until it starts to decline.
Yeah.
Our annual grasses are going to start to taper off in quality on any given year by the end of May. And so if that's all you have, I mean, it would basically be like eating the cardboard on the outside of the cereal box for the rest of the summer if that's all you had. So then you start getting those effects on body quality condition and all those other things that then carry over into reproduction too.
And then it's into the winter. Like when people say winter kill, it's not necessarily the snow or the cold that's killing them. It's that they now don't have enough food too, right? It's like they're not. So a lot of winter kill isn't just purely it's cold or we got a lot of snow. A lot of snow impacts that not having all of that good quality like sage that they're not now able to browse on. There's not as much of it.
Right. So it all ties together.
Yeah.
It does.
This may not be a thing, but I remember the year that we moved to Wyoming, 2018. We were driving from Arkansas in May, and we had been here in April. There was snow on the ground, and we were just full of optimism moving here. And we go through northern Colorado. Everything's brown. It's May, like literally late May. And actually, second time we came up, like the final move was the beginning of July, end of June. And we crossed the Colorado border into Wyoming, and everything was instantly substantially greener. Like to the point where like kids are saying, wow, it's so green here, because we just drove up from the western Texas, basically. We stopped at my wife's brother's house, and it was just brown from basically like Tucumcari, New Mexico, all the way to Cheyenne. And then when you hit Cheyenne, all of a sudden it was like green, solid here to Sheridan on 25. Does that have anything to do with this, or is that just different ecosystems, or I don't know if that's or not,
I'm trying to think. So 18, we had a really good moisture year.
Yeah, we did.
That could have been part of it.
Yeah.
I think they were in a drought down in the southwest a little bit
Okay.
farther, so it could have been related to that.
But I mean,
But it
years
could
since,
al-
it's been like there's a palpable difference when you cross kind of the state line. It feels more green here later,
Yeah,
but we're further north and we're sometimes drier. I don't know. It may have
We are.
nothing to do with it.
so I don't think this violates any. This is a kind of a similar thing to illustrate your point. I don't think this violates anything. If it does, maybe we can cut it
But
out.
yeah, we'll find out.
So, and I will not name the names of
exact
the states
places?
of the
Okay.
states to illustrate this, but we were doing some helicopter surveys of where we've been doing a lot of work to control annual
Yep.
grass. So herbicide applications.
Okay.
Right, we can talk about that if we need to,
Okay.
because I know people get uncomfortable sometimes when you talk about herbicides.
Yeah.
But we had about as high-ranking government official as you can get in an individual state,
Okay.
Okay.
right? and we flew to the state line with a neighboring state where they had not been doing any active management, and it was exactly it was green and lush on the Wyoming side, and it was brown and tan on the other non-Wyoming side.
It's like 5 options.
And yeah, maybe I don't. Hopefully, we don't get in trouble. But the
Allegedly.
it-
We'll just say
yeah.
allegedly.
So yeah, my neighbor told me about this story
Asking
happening
for a
one
friend.
time, and just the clear sort of visual
You
representation
see
of
the
what you
difference.
could see,
Yeah.
and this person clearly sort of intuited that and has sort of moved forward a little bit. Yeah, so we do crazy things, like we'll go out once a month and clip and weigh grass and then run it through nutrient analysis. I mean, that's the weird stuff you do when you're
That
a
sounds
scientist.
exhilarating.
It's lovely. Yeah, we used to get called they used to call us the grass watchers in one place that we
Yeah.
worked on. But so, I mean, we've got the data to show that when you convert it from annuals to perennials, you have more protein, higher energy, and all that stuff throughout
Sure.
the year too.
Sure.
But the green and the green and brown comparison, it's stark.
You
It's
can't
stunning.
not see it. I
You
mean,
can't.
it feels vibrant and alive, and then
Yep.
you're like, oh my gosh, it's like a wasteland.
Yep. And here across the west, our cheatgrass gets that really dark purple tinge right before it turns brown. I mean, that's one of the things people, if you're way back in the back country and you just see a patch of something that's purple in late spring or summer, if you're out scouting, it might be worth calling your game and fish person or local extension office, or get in touch with somebody that you think knows about what's happening. If you're on the BLM, get in touch with the BLM office and say, I think I saw something back in this area that you guys might not be aware of. And even if they're wrong, it's way better than just going by something and not reporting it.
How's that spread? So, I mean, it's seeds, but then, like, how's it go further away from that one little spot?
Wind a lot of times.
We don't have any
some
of that
these.
here.
Yeah, we don't at all, do we? I mean, there's a pretty steady move, especially of this grass, ventinata or North African wiregrass, whatever you want to call it, that's moving east.
Sure.
Largely driven by wind. Although I will tell you, a lot of the first places we see some of these are on either livestock or game trails.
Yeah, sure. They're walking through it. It's
Yep.
there's burrs in the seed, and
Yep.
it's just
Sticking in their hair, dropping out. Unfortunately, we might spread it sometimes.
yeah.
I
On our
mean,
shoelaces, and
shoelaces, ATVs. If you got a bird dog that, gets the same thing, gets them in their fur, and then they can move them other places. When we first started realizing we had ventinata in northeast Wyoming, the places that we found it most consistently early on was on publicly accessible lands where a lot of hunting traffic occurred. I don't know that was the cause.
Right.
Right. It was probably just correlated. It wasn't causation.
There's more random movements through that, and
Right.
Yeah.
And people coming from elsewhere that are, maybe if you just hunted chuckers in Idaho and you came to Sheridan County, there's the potential that your dog had ventinata seed stuck to its,
yeah,
its vest. Some of those
Right.
people have vests. I mean, we don't know. I don't think we'll ever know. They move in a lot of different ways. But I think there are things that we can at least think through and be aware of. If I'm if I'm in a place that I know has really big problems with some of these species, and I'm going to try to take the time before I go somewhere else that I know is clean and wash the truck, clean the undercarriage a little bit and stuff. And just stop at the car wash and knock off the worst of the mud. Just little things that we can do to try to prevent moving it into the core, the best of the best areas. And I mean, it's not always the easiest, but just try to keep in mind that we unintentionally we may contribute to the problem.
Cool. Yeah, let's revisit your scenario of guy coming from Alabama.
sorry.
Let's
So we
paint
got
that picture.
We got Joe Hunter from Alabama, and
Right.
he doesn't know, or maybe now he does know what this stuff is. But what do you do? If you see a limited patch of it, maybe you call the local office for that piece of land, or am I carrying like a little 2-ounce bottle of Roundup?
Yeah. So
that feels like a bad idea.
It might be a bad idea. It might be
It's probably like starting with like prevention, like what can he do to his truck
So that if you know you're going from an infested area to a clean area, I mean, just wash your truck, knock the mud and stuff off the bottom, or your ATV. I mean,
ATVs, yeah.
Man, you get that stuff all up under
Oh,
the
yeah.
undercarriage, and there's seeds everywhere. Just
makes
be
sense.
aware of that, right? That would be part of it. There are some neat online apps that you can download on your phone that has pictures of the grasses, and if you got your GPS on, they're free. You can just say, "Look, I found this grass. I'm going to mark a point and upload it." One of those that has been used nationwide. Can I say the name?
Absolutely.
It's not. It's a free thing. It's
do
called EDD Maps.
EDD.
Yeah, it's early detection. I should know. Early detection in something maps.
Gotcha.
And the whole so it was designed out of the University of Georgia. Chuck Bargeron and his team, specifically for
Shout out.
this.
Shout out to Chuck.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm new to the soundboard, so I had to at least get one in.
And so it was designed specifically to address this issue. We got people all over the place
Right.
that aren't trained botanists or weed scientists, but they care about the places that they're in. And so, once you learn what these species look like, you can drop a point on EdMaps, and then it goes through an entire verification process.
Oh, okay.
You can take a picture and upload it with it. Doesn't cost anything to do it. And then it comes to somebody like me, and I look at the picture, and I'm like, yeah, that's probably the right thing.
Right.
And then we verify it, and then it's all shared as well. So if you put a point for cheatgrass on EdMaps, then you would be able to see it in the future too.
Oh, that's pretty handy.
So it's a really neat system. And some states use it a lot, others don't. But in terms of, so that's one way to report it and let the people know. I think the other thing is, if you're interacting with game wardens or something, we don't always hope that happens, I guess. But
what positive interactions?
Yeah, positive.
Absolutely.
There's some really good, there's some really good interactions. They're going to be aware of this in most cases, right? They're concerned about the habitat as much as anybody else. And then I would think anybody involved in natural resources, like as a profession, wherever somebody's hunting, if you said there's a big patch of Medusa head over there, or 2 draws over, they're going to at least understand the potential impacts of that.
So if you're hiking and you are brushed up all your stuff, what Medusa head looks like. Should you just report it, or it's like, hey man, I should pull this out? I don't know. Like what would you do? What would someone do, or do you just report it?
I would say just start with reporting it.
Okay,
that's what I would say. I might do something different, but it's like a different level for me, just because.
Sure.
What you don't want to
clip off little leaves and weigh them.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I mean, we have like pulled and bagged plants to where seeds didn't get produced and things like that too. You don't want it to completely ruin your recreation. Too. I think just reporting and letting somebody know where it is, and understanding that it's not just a weed problem that affects ranchers. It affects all of us that interact in the outdoors in one way or another.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it from my personal perspective for hunting quality, but it could also affect a rancher's pocketbook if this stuff is only growing for a short period of time, and then it's very little nutrition value.
Yep.
If you're trying to raise cows and put pounds on them, you're going to have to do a lot more supplemental feeding later. That's wildly expensive.
You are. And there was some data from some ag economists that showed that ranches with a high cheatgrass component have a much higher probability of going out of business than those that don't have one.
No kidding.
And it's really volatile. So one year you might have 100 pounds of grass of cheatgrass for things to eat, and then the next year you might have 2,000. But you can't depend on it. So
Sure.
undependable, and that applies to anything that uses it too. Unfortunately, some of our partners in northern Nevada, I mean, that's all they have in some cases for parts of the year, and so
Sure.
they've had to figure out ways to manage around it.
I feel like I've heard Cal from Meat Eater talk about too on block management stuff, because he likes to talk about block management programs a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That was some of the biggest feedback, is like why they wouldn't want to enter block management is because of the weed issue that then ruins their grass. So it was just like prevention on like washing your truck and stuff. I've heard that before kind of thing. So.
And I mean, to broaden the context too, I'm talking specifically about one very small subset of these invasive plants. I mean, it's bigger than that. Like you get salt cedar and Russian olive on riparian areas that completely change the way they work, and it affects all of us, whether we know it or not.
We talked a couple weeks ago about zebra mussels kind of being analogous to this problem. And that's become like, there's some legal ramifications in some places if you do not get your vessel checked before launching it in the water, getting it inspected, I guess. So hopefully we're not headed there, but maybe at some point we might be if this continues to get worse. But I like to think about other areas where it's a similar problem, just like, hey, they're fighting it a little different way.
Yeah.
Because they have to. Because if you get those zebra mussels in a healthy habitat that doesn't have them, they take over real fast, and that's kind of same thing, right?
Same scale, same sort of processes. I think I'm thinking back, maybe not same scale, especially in the western U.S., just because our water ecosystems they're restricted, right, compared to other things. But the process is the same.
Sure.
I think one of the key issues especially with cheatgrass, it's sort of been pretty well established, is we might be beyond prevention in a lot of places, except for these really clean cores.
So could you maybe, like you kind of prefaced it a little bit about like some of the solutions. So you were talking about some herbicide stuff. So like, let's say an area is designated like, hey, this is really good, but we've now identified this as an at-risk area. What are like some like preventions or things that you guys are, that would then happen like after that?
Yeah. So prevention, one of the key things that we think about is, there's a pretty robust, at least on federal lands, there's a pretty robust weed-free forage system.
Yeah.
So weed-free
See that a
hay,
lot.
like you can't take
certified.
It's got to
weed-free
be
hay.
certified to take it on the forest, right? So that's entirely in place to stop the introduction of new weed species onto U.S. Forest Service lands, right? There's programs for like gravel and stuff like that too. As far as prevention works, or prevention activities, that might be the best example of something that we think probably works pretty well. In many cases, we kind of steal ideas from the medical field as well, and like with cancer, you hear about early detection, rapid response.
Yeah.
So get tested, find stuff early, and you're more successful. We apply that at a landscape scale for invasive species too. So if you can't prevent it, if you can find it when it's a patch as big as this table rather than a patch that's 100 acres, your probability of controlling it and keeping it from spreading is way higher, and your costs are way lower than if you wait until it's huge.
Sure.
And it started to do all those things that we talked about earlier to change the way the system works. And so in many cases, when we're trying to be aggressive and reduce the impacts, I mean, we're putting helicopters up in the sky and doing herbicide applications. in a lot of these sort of
Sure.
remote
Big
big
right.
areas especially. And when I say we, I mean, I've been saying we a lot. This is agencies, landowners, this is across the board, and we got 30-something different partners in our program. And in areas that are highly at risk for becoming worse, there's some grant dollars that have been made available to different landowners, so they only incur a part of the cost.
Yeah.
Right? And so I get it. I feel compelled. You guys can cut this out if you want to, but people get really twitchy when we start talking about herbicides. And if we had other options, so we try altering grazing practices, we try, changing soil chemistry, we try all these things. We actually did a review of this. Yeah, I could send it to you if you have trouble going to sleep at night. So we reviewed like 64 years of literature around cheatgrass control. And really the only things that consistently worked short-term and long-term were chemical options.
Yeah.
And sometimes chemical options paired with seeding desirable perennials on those sites. We're not talking about Roundup in most of these cases, although we do use it sometimes. But some of the, I would say, more advanced herbicides that we work with for these grasses are really selective. And they act on a seed while it's germinating, and when you've got a species that has to establish from seed, and it keeps the seed from germinating,
Okay.
right? It's pretty selective. All the perennial stuff that's already there doesn't even touch it.
Yeah. It's like birth control.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So it's, I mean, there are, and there, we the big group would not be using them if we felt like the potential negative impacts outweighed the potential benefits of doing those things.
Sure. That makes sense.
So, and we're seeing great results with some of these approaches too. Multiple years of control, not necessarily an increase in diversity right away, but no further loss in diversity. Way more forage production in sites that were treated. We've got a study now here in northeast Wyoming with a bunch of partners where we've got like 60-something mule deer collared with GPS collars. And we've been tracking them for 2 years to see if they use those places where we've controlled the annual grasses more than places that still have them. So I mean, we can talk protein in grass all day long, but we have not done that many studies, we, like the scientific community, to actually document how
If it affects
animals
travel.
respond. Yeah, if they respond and use those areas differently. So I'm really excited when we actually get some results. We'll follow up with you guys and let you know what
I can't
we
wait
find out.
to
I'm
to
really
hear about
excited
that.
about it.
Yeah. That would be really
Yeah,
interesting.
it could be pretty cool.
So it sounds like, to boil this thing down, step one's awareness.
Yep.
Both understanding it's a problem, and then identification, I guess, would be the second part of being aware, being able to identify these three main offenders.
Yep.
I want to put a picture at the end of this podcast. Maybe it'll be part of our title slide, just like instead of Brian, your pretty face.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
We'll just have
we got some pictures.
check
for
out
you.
this cheat grass.
Yep.
From Brian the weed scientist.
Yeah, we can do that.
And then step two is, after you're able to identify, is do something about it. If you see it, call it in.
Yep.
Try to make a difference. If you don't know, let me say that better. If you have friends that you're hunting with and they don't know, tell them about it.
Yeah.
Tell them, hey, you need to figure this out. This is kind of a big deal. If you want your grandkids to be hunting in the same spot,
Right.
Makes a difference.
Yeah, and I didn't say it as far as who to tell, but a lot of us get the opportunity to hunt private land.
Mm-hmm.
And if the rancher gives you permission to be on there hunting, they probably want to know too.
Yeah.
Let them know, and then they'll know who to get in touch with too. I mean,
Sure.
because of those potential impacts that they have. I mean, they might also be like, yeah, I know, I'm sick of hearing about that stuff. But you would rather them at least have the opportunity to respond than to just think everything's great in the back 40 and it's not. So
I hunted mule deer in the sandhills in Nebraska this year. Could you tell the rancher there how to get rid of all those sandburrs? Please?
We probably got something. We probably got something for it.
It was so
Yeah.
bad. Like you'd kneel down and all of a sudden your knee is in bad shape.
Not
because
good.
You just got all the burrs.
Not good.
And if you're trying to go prone, forget about it.
Oh yeah, you just got to toughen up a little bit.
Oh man,
Wow.
it's
That's
painful. Painful. Brian, thank you for coming,
You bet.
sharing. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you're like, man, I really wish I'd have gotten a chance to talk about this thing?
I mean, if you want more information,
Yeah, how can they find one?
we had this really clunky University of Wyoming email address. It was terrible to I can send you a QR code to that one, I guess, but we're migrating to invasivegrasses.com.
Invasivegrasses.com.
Yep.
Okay.
And there's going to be identification.
Is that live now?
Yeah, there's information. We got some embedded content on there. It's semi-live, but the brochures for how to identify these grasses are on there. There's some summaries of some of the things that we've been learning, and some of the messaging that we're putting out for the whole sort of Western U.S. So it'll be a good place to go to get some basic information.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming in, sharing with us.
Yeah, thanks for all the knowledge. We'll make sure we share all of those links in our comments, or if you're an e-blast participant, we'll have links and we'll have some more information there too, so you guys can figure it out.
Yeah, thanks for letting me come on. It's fun to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, and I was gonna say that we behind us are these mule deer. If you're just listening and you're not watching on YouTube, but we changed our setup a little bit because we're working on a mule deer tour video, and we weren't going to video this originally, but I just thought of my mom. I feel like I really had to have a shout out to my mom in here because she's been watching the podcast, and if she couldn't watch them on the YouTubes, then I would have felt bad.
And she couldn't give us a thumbs up, right?
I know she's gonna thumb it up. I expect an extra thumbs up now, Mom.
That's great.
Yeah.
I can share it that way too. We can link to it on our website
Perfect.
as well.
Perfect.
So thanks, guys.
Yep. Thank you.